Imagine standing in freezing woods, surrounded by enemy troops, no reinforcements, and tanks closing in. Most would panic. Charles Coolidge didn't flinch. He wasn't a general. He wasn't even a college graduate. He was a quiet printer from Tennessee, until World War II turned him into one of the bravest leaders the U.S. Army ever saw. In October year 1944, deep in the Vosges mountains of France, Coolidge and a handful of green soldiers were pinned down by a German infantry company, and later, enemy tanks. He was outgunned, outnumbered, and totally alone. With no radios, no backup, and surrounded by chaos, Coolidge made a choice: to lead, not with rank, but with calm courage, calculated defiance, and the unshakable will to protect his men at all costs. What happened next earned him the Medal of Honor, but his journey didn't begin on a battlefield. So, how did a soft-spoken teen from Signal Mountain become a battlefield legend? What kind of man risks everything not for glory but to protect his brothers in arms? Stay with me, because once you hear what Charles Coolidge did and why he did it, you'll understand what real heroism looks like. This is not just a war story. This is a story about character. Charles Henry Coolidge was born in 1921 in the tight-knit town of Signal Mountain, Tennessee, a place where values ran deep and neighbors stood by each other. It was the kind of place where a handshake mattered and your word was your bond. His family owned a small printing business, and even as a teenager, Charles spent long hours there helping out. It wasn't glamorous work, but it taught him something far more important than profit: loyalty, duty, and the pride of doing a job right even when no one's watching. The Great Depression didn't spare the Coolidge family, but Charles watched his father fight to keep the business alive, refusing to lay off workers, even when times were desperate. That example of quiet responsibility would shape Charles for the rest of his life. He graduated from high school in 1939, and while most kids dreamed of college, Charles had a different feeling in his gut. War was coming. When asked why he didn't go to college, he famously said, "It didn't take a whole lot of education to go and shoot people." That wasn't sarcasm, it was clarity. Coolidge wasn't chasing adventure, he was preparing to serve. He understood that freedom came with a cost, and he was willing to pay it. In the summer of year 1942, Charles Coolidge received the draft notice he'd been expecting. He didn't complain, didn't hesitate, he just packed his things and reported for duty. It was his turn to serve, and he embraced it without fear. His basic training took him across the South, from Georgia to Alabama to North Carolina. That's where he was introduced to the tools of war: the water-cooled .30 caliber machine gun and the 81mm mortar. Heavy, powerful weapons that demanded skill and calm under pressure. He was assigned to Company M, 141st Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division, a group made up of citizen soldiers just like him, farmers, clerks, mechanics, now gearing up for one of the most brutal campaigns of the war. In the spring of year 1943, they shipped out to North Africa. It wasn't combat yet, but it was preparation for something far worse: the invasion of Italy. For Coolidge, the mountainous terrain felt oddly familiar. He had grown up hiking Tennessee's ridges, and that instinct paid off. Carrying the heavy tripod of the machine gun, he'd often skip carrying water to lighten the load, choosing instead to rely on his knowledge of terrain to find drinkable water. Already his quiet confidence, grit, and endurance were standing out. In September year 1943, the 36th Infantry Division landed in Italy, and Charles Coolidge's real war began. The fighting was brutal. They hit the beaches at Salerno and pushed forward through a wall of German resistance. It wasn't just bullets they faced. It was mud, freezing rain, landmines, and machine guns hidden in the hills. Coolidge saw men fall beside him, friends he had trained with, laughed with, and gone in seconds, but he never wavered. He learned to adapt, to survive, and somehow, he did more than survive, he led. In battle after battle, Anzio, San Pietro, the Rapido River, and Monte Cassino, he proved himself again and again. When the bullets flew, Coolidge stayed steady. When chaos erupted, he stayed calm. In May year 1944, after one especially fierce fight at Anzio, Coolidge was awarded the Silver Star. His actions saved lives and earned the respect of every man who served beside him. But there were costs. His unit shrank from 130 men to just 27. That kind of loss changes a person, and Coolidge carried it silently. And through it all, Charles refused to wear his helmet. "The British don't wear them," he'd say with a grin, trading steel for his soft Jeep cap. Somehow, he made it work. By August year 1944, Charles Coolidge was no longer a rookie. He was a hardened veteran with battle scars on his soul. After the grueling campaign in Italy, his unit joined the next major Allied push, the invasion of southern France. known as Operation Dragoon. They landed under a hot sun, and for a brief moment, it felt like the tide was turning. German resistance was light in those early days, and Coolidge's unit advanced over 500 miles in the first month alone, chasing retreating Axis forces. But this wasn't the same team he had fought beside in Italy. Most of the old-timers were gone, lost to wounds, capture, or worse. His new unit was filled with fresh replacements, many still smelling of boot camp. They looked to Coolidge for guidance, confidence, and survival. And he gave it, not with speeches, but with steady leadership. He showed them how to stay alive and how to fight like brothers. As the Allies pushed north, the terrain changed, and so did the resistance. The deeper they drove into France and turned east toward Germany, the fiercer the enemy became. The easy miles were over. What waited ahead would test every lesson Coolidge had learned, and every ounce of strength he had left to give. Late October, year 1944. The air was thin and biting cold in the Vosges mountains of northeastern France. The 141st Infantry Regiment was pushing toward Germany, and Charles Coolidge was now a squad leader, in charge of 12 young, inexperienced men. Near the small village of Belmont-sur-Boutant, Coolidge's unit was sent to secure a hill in a wooded area. What they found instead was a full German infantry company dug in and ready for a fight. Coolidge was the senior man on the ground. No officers, no backup. Just him, his squad, and a handful of men from Company K. They were outnumbered more than 5 to 1, and their position was isolated. For 3 straight days they held the line. German small arms, machine guns, and mortars rained down. Coolidge kept his men moving, spread out, and calm. He gave orders without panic, inspired confidence, and somehow they held their ground. Even when the Germans crept dangerously close, Coolidge's squad didn't fall apart. Then came the tanks. 2 Panzer force appeared through the trees, their cannons scanning for targets. Coolidge didn't hide. He walked straight toward one of the tanks and shouted at the crew to surrender. The response? A burst of machine gun fire right past him. Unshaken, he dodged into cover and immediately started coordinating a counter. They had no anti-tank weapons, just grenades and grit. Coolidge lobbed grenades, repositioned his squad, and kept yelling encouragement as the ground shook beneath them. The men, many still new to battle, fought like seasoned warriors under his leadership. Some later said they had no idea how they held out. The answer was simple. Coolidge never permitted them to quit. When reinforcements finally arrived, the hill was still in American hands. Not one of Coolidge's men had been killed. For his courage, leadership, and refusal to back down, Charles Coolidge was awarded the Medal of Honor. It wasn't a medal he chased, it was the last thing on his mind. When asked how he survived, he didn't talk about tactics or training. He just said, "I didn't care about me, I cared about my men. I'd do anything for them." And that's what made him unforgettable. Charles Coolidge survived the war, and somehow, he did so without ever being wounded, not once. He credited his survival to faith, not luck. After the war, he returned home to Signal Mountain, Tennessee, back to the printing business his father had built. He married Frances Seep, and together they raised 3 sons. Life was quieter now, but the character forged in war never left him. He never saw himself as a hero. If you asked him about the Medal of Honor, he'd shift the spotlight to talk about the men he fought beside, the ones who didn't make it home. That humility defined him more than any medal ever could. Coolidge eventually took over Chattanooga Printing and Engraving, running it with the same quiet integrity he'd shown on the battlefield. He treated his employees like family and earned the respect of everyone who knew him. He worked well into his 90s, only retiring at age 95. When he passed away on the 6th of April, year 2021, at the age of 99, he was one of the last living Medal of Honor recipients from World War II. His funeral was quiet, dignified, just like the man himself. His story isn't just about war. It's about quiet strength, unshakable values, and a man who did the right thing even when no one was watching. Charles Coolidge didn't seek fame. He didn't crave medals or headlines. He simply did what was right, over and over again. In a world full of noise, his legacy is a quiet reminder of what true leadership looks like. Courage without ego, strength without cruelty, loyalty without limits. He led by example, not by force. If his story moved you even just a little, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Pass it on. Heroes like Charles deserve to be remembered, not just studied. And if you want more incredible stories of real-life heroes, Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Their courage deserves to be remembered.